This call is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. This is Renee Rentmeester again with the Cooking Without Looking TV show podcast. I'm the creator and executive producer of the show and the podcast. And we have another very interesting person today on our show. We have Pastor Kevin Perrine. Pastor, very nice to have you today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. You called me, you heard about us, you heard about our Cooking Without Looking TV show, and you called me to tell me about your about everything you're doing, but tell me a little bit. You also are legally blind, is that correct?
Yes, I've been visually impaired since birth. It's genetic. Um, my father had it, his father had it, and so on farther back. And it's a disease called Peter's anatomy. It's basically, it has 5 different diseases in it. Most of them are common. There's some abnormal ones in it, but because of the rarity of the condition, the levels that people in our family have it go from one extreme to the other. From legally blind, 20 over 200, totally blind.
Wow.
So, but most times, from a historical point of view, by the time we're 65, the disease takes all of our vision. So
Oh
I got
gosh.
I got a couple years before that, but not many.
Oh wow. So what exactly do you see with this disease?
Well, my right eye is just usually light perception. The left eye is probably 20 over 300, which means I can make out large objects like buildings, houses, cars. But if you wanted me to read a print material like a newspaper or magazine without special equipment, I'm not doing it. Um, Everything normally for me, it's like a foggy day all the time in
Oh
both
wow.
eyes. So,
How did you decide to become a pastor?
well, it's the short version is when I was in high school, there was an This was back when they could have Bible studies and other church-related activities in high schools, um, and so that'll tell you how old I am, basically. But
Okay.
back then, when there was a Bible study in the church done in the public high school I went to, there was a teacher who put it on, sponsored it. And then after I started doing it, we did a lot of mission work, outreach, helping other people. And it just clicked with me from that point on.
Well, I was wondering as I was getting ready to speak with you, I was thinking you work with. I want you to talk about your organization, but you work with other blind and visually impaired people. And as a pastor, I'm certain they must come to you sometimes for counseling. What are some of the things you tell other people who are blind or visually impaired?
Well, I think some of the major issues of today in our society today is I recently read an article that says 85% of the general population in the United States do not know what canes are. They equate them with the canes of our grandparents who needed them because of age related and not sight related necessarily. So that's a big issue right now in our community is awareness of what canes are for the blind, what they're used for, how they help. There are a lot of people that come to myself and my wife for counseling, and the issues range from simple to very difficult, such as because of the aging population, we have a lot of people who are 55 plus who just became visually impaired or blind. and they've never known any different. They don't know about all the special equipment, all the possible public assistance that's out there for people who are visually impaired.
Well, that's good. It's often the case that there's so many things available, but a lot of times until that issue is on our own doorstep, we don't know what to do or where to turn, and that's part of the mission of our show. But tell us about your organization, please, Pastor.
Well, one of the reasons why the organization was started is because of sociology problems in Toledo. And one of those issues was there was a lot of people, as I just mentioned, who were becoming visually impaired and didn't have anyone to speak with about becoming blind and the issues related to it, such as how to do mobility around your own home, how to do daily living skills, or just to talk about. I'm in my late 50s, getting close to 60, and my biological sister, even at this point, doesn't acknowledge that I'm visually impaired. So there's a lot of people in a lot of families who have come forward and said, we need this service of people to show us and our families how to do certain things, such as one of the things we do is recreational activities. So showing people how to do even the simplest tasks like bowling or some of the other stuff we do for people in our organization is mobility. We help them figure out how to maneuver around their house, how to cook an egg, even some of the very, very basic stuff. How can you vacuum your floor if you can't see it? Well, there's a method to do that, and that way you stay independent. Our organization, 95% of our services are free to anyone who's visually impaired. And the other 5 is sometimes we do recreational things that cost more than the organization wants to have to pay for, and it gives that person investment in the organization also when they give a little money for an activity. But we do everything from employment to mobility. We also help, as you said earlier, with counseling issues for family who are dealing with someone who is visually impaired. We do a lot of resourcing. If you came to us and said, my mother just became blind, what things are out there that we can find for her equipment? We also, one of the other major things that we do is we assist parents who have vision, who have kids who are visually impaired, learn Braille, first grade, second grade Braille. And then we also teach people who want to learn, who are visually impaired, Braille. So we do a little bit of everything. It's basically if someone calls our organization and says, hey, I need this help, or can you help me with this? We jump in with both feet basically and help.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that one of your sisters doesn't really recognize you as a visually impaired person. Do you think that sometimes family members have a modicum of embarrassment in a way, like since they don't want to admit it, maybe they're embarrassed in some way, which is like a really, really old way of looking at things?
Well, I don't know if it's that or if it's a coping mechanism to say, if I don't acknowledge it, it's not there. Or if it's, I think part of my sister's issue is that, and she's going to be listening to this podcast. So,
Okay.
But I think part of the issue is that it's more about that because of how social I am and the things that I do in the community, I don't allow things to stop me, either through mobility issues or other things. I just go out and do it. I'm very adventurous. I'll try anything once. And
Once.
but yeah, but there's a lot of visually impaired people. We have a very high population in Toledo. They say it's about 65% of the population in Toledo who's visually impaired, who
Wow.
don't get out of their house. They're basically, for better terminology, they're couch potatoes because
Sure.
their families don't allow them to do those things. I had a young woman who was 40 years old and learned to cook for the first time last year, because her family would never show her how to cook,
Wow.
because they were too scared.
Well,
And
also, I
so,
think that sometimes, like you mentioned that your sister doesn't believe or acknowledge your blindness because you do so many things. Yeah, I think a lot of people hang on to the old stereotypes that we have of a blind person. We probably believe, like you said, a lot of you believe more often that a person who is blind is the couch potato type. You just put them down somewhere and they just sit there, wake up, fall asleep, eat, things like that. And if you don't fit the stereotype, it's real hard for them to acknowledge that.
right. Well, the other thing is, I looked at a national survey done by the National Health Organization, and according to them, 80% of the population who's visually impaired are obese,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
means that sort of looks, when I see that, I see their family members, their friends, whomever, bringing them food while they sit on the couch, or saying, you don't have anything to do better than watch TV and to eat. And that's not the case. And that's one of the reasons for our organization, is to get people to eat healthier. One of the things that we're going to be doing in June is a bicycling class for people who want to learn how to ride a bike on a tandem. And so it's doing those kinds of things to get people out in the air, exercising, to become healthier. Just because you're visually impaired doesn't mean you have to be a couch potato.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And let's be clear again. The name of your organization is Diverse Opportunities for the Visually Impaired, and you're based in Toledo, Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes. But not only in Toledo, which is Lucas County, but we also do an adjoining two counties, which is Wood County in Ohio. And then, because we're right on the Michigan line, we also have people who come from Monroe, Michigan. So we also allow them to come and join our activities also.
Well, and I want to bring this up because, of course, this is called Cooking Without Looking. And I would be remiss in not mentioning that you have culinary arts training and you are certified in Ohio. So tell us about your cooking escapades. And then we
Yes.
want to come to that recipe of yours because that recipe is amazing.
Um, well, when I worked in high school, one of the things that I did was, um, as most high school students have a job, whether it's paperboy or behind a counter at McDonald's, I decided to work for a local catering company. And the chef who was in charge of the building I was at took me under his wing and helped me learn skills, cooking skills, and brought me up through the ranks. And then 2 years later, he sponsored me to go to a culinary arts training program in Nelsonville, Ohio, which was 2 years. And so I went through that, and it was a different experience for the college and me, not only because of my visual impairment, and their classes were not designed for someone who's visually impaired. So I got to work with some of the administrators to redesign their program for people who were disabled, and also get the cooking experience and the knowledge that I needed to come back out and work as an assistant chef for this gentleman who sponsored me. And even till today, I use a lot of that knowledge that I learned back then in my own kitchen and helping other people.
Some of the things, what's one thing, maybe one or two things that stuck out to you from that training?
Well, I think the biggest thing is um, the two things that stand out is one is that I don't like bland food, and then the other thing is I think when you're in the kitchen, I think that there's a couple major products that sometimes you need to invest in because they're a little more costly, but they're tools of the trade that can help you. A good knife set, a good cutting board. The cutting boards that I've had, I have currently 4 different cutting boards, and I use them for different purposes. But I paid very nicely for them, but they're quality material, and I use them all the time.
Do
So
you
I think
prefer wood or
sometimes
plastic?
wood,
Hmm.
wood. I also have a marble cutting board,
Oh,
and it's used for bigger products, like when you make turkey and chicken, whole chickens, things like that. I use it when I grill out with gas grill that my wife and I own, because it's a lot better than wood or plastic because obviously you can't cut into it, so it doesn't have the issue of bacteria or transfer of any chemicals or anything. So, but if I don't have that, I use all of my other cutting boards are wood.
oh, nice, nice. And that's been told to us many times about the knives to have a very good knife set, and especially it's safer. A good
Right.
knife set and to keep them very sharp. How do you keep your knives sharp?
I sharpen them myself. I have a sharpening stone, a dry sharpening stone, and I keep them sharp myself because I know how I like them, and I know I don't like to take them to any particular person um, because of trust issues, because of the size of them and how often I use them. I don't go a day without using one knife or another because my set is very large, probably in the neighborhood of about 45 different kinds of knives,
Oh,
um,
wow.
different edging, different sizes, different cutting styles for different products.
That's amazing. 45. What what kind of what are certain things? Give us an example of that, of how
Well,
you
um,
certain knives
well,
for certain things.
yes. Like I have paring knives, boning knives, and I have multiple of each just for the simple reason is sometimes they're longer for boning. You might use a short one to do a ham or a long one, depending on the size of the ham. Let's say for turkey, you might need a couple of different sizes based on how big the turkey is or where you're cutting into that product at, if you're cutting through fat or skin. So I use them based on what I'm cooking or what I'm cutting up.
Now let's get to the heart of the matter here. You sent us the cooking without looking recipe of the day, which is fudge in a slow cooker, correct?
Correct. Correct.
Boy, this is
One,
so
one,
easy.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. We like the recipe. Um, One of the things that our organization does is we like crock pot cooking for those who are visually impaired because it lowers the risk of people getting injured, but it also does a couple other things. It allows the person who's cooking to learn slowly how to put things into the crock pot and layer, and then at the end to say, well, we're going to stir this up. And it also teaches them there are products out there that you can use to safely get food out of that crock pot, slotted spoons, whatever it may be. But for this recipe, one of the reasons why we like it is A, as you said, it's simple, but it's only 3 items that you need to cook with it. And then the crock pot does most of the rest of the cooking. And it's not very hard. My wife, who's totally blind, loves to make it at Christmas time only. But even though she's totally blind, she doesn't have a problem with it, because you can use different size crock pots with it. You can use a real small one or a real large one, based on how strong you are or what your mobility in the kitchen is.
So let us know what it is, if you describe it for our listeners.
Okay. It's chocolate fudge in the crock pot, and basically you have 3 ingredients, which is vanilla and morsels like you would use for chocolate chip. And that chocolate chip morsel, one of the other nice things about the recipe is, if you don't like the chocolate, you prefer white chocolate, you can use that, or butterscotch.
Oh, nice.
And so once you put that in and stir it up, the crock pot cooks without the cover for about an hour. And then you take it out, and just like most people do, you put it into a buttered pan and let it cool in the refrigerator for about 2 hours. Take it out, break it up or cut it up. My wife prefers to cut it. I like to break it because I like bigger pieces. And then you can just store it it also freezes very well. That's what the other thing we like about it, because that way we're not eating the whole thing at once. We have to let it come up to room temperature, and by then we feel guilty, so we don't eat it all.
When I said it was simple, it's like I meant this is too simple. I would be doing this every other day. Yeah, it just looks so good too.
Yes, and it is. And it's not difficult, even from if you have trouble with wrist movements or hand movements. It's not very hard to stir. It's also easy to spoon out if you prefer to do it that way instead of pouring, because you have it on for an hour. It basically becomes not liquefied, but it's thicker. So it's like mashed potatoes thickness. So it's easier to spoon out. You can also put nuts in it if you prefer. So you can do other things with it. And some people we know have, marshmallows, that's right. And some people have got it hard in the freezer, then brought it out and put whipped cream on it.
Ooh, that sounds excellent.
We had one woman use cookie cutters on it and make Christmas trees, and then she decorated it. So there's other with M&Ms. So you could do things like that. So yes, it's a very easy recipe.
That sounds wonderful. Gosh, I'm gonna try that, because it just looks so simple. You just throw it in the crock pot, let it go, and then put it in the oven. So tell me again, so for everyone, how can they reach out to you, the name of your organization, and how they can reach out to you?
You can look us up on Facebook. We do have a Facebook page, or you can call us. Our office phone number is 419-699-1864. And that has a caveat with it. It's normal business hours. But the other thing that I didn't mention, which I'm being told with a note here to mention, is that, yes, earlier you said we deal with individuals in Toledo, Ohio, but we've also dealt with people in other states based on what they need. We had one young lady from New York who needed to learn Braille skills. We had one woman from Rhode Island who wanted to know which resources were available in Rhode Island. So we have dealt with other people. You can also email me or the organization at infodovi@mail.com.
Oh, thank you so much, Pastor Perrine. Again, your the Executive Director of Diverse Opportunities for the Visually Impaired. Thank you again for being with us. We look forward to having you on our Cooking Without Looking TV show Quarantine Edition this Friday. And again, this was Renee Rentmeester, the Cooking Without Looking TV show podcast. And we like to say we're changing the way people see blindness. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.